I want to be clear about one thing before I start. I was not looking for trouble in Coldwater Bend. I was not looking for anything in Coldwater Bend. I was passing through. I had been passing through a great many towns in the previous 2 years, which is another way of saying I had been moving without direction and calling it freedom, the way men do when they don't want to admit that freedom and running are sometimes the same thing. My name is Tate Drum. I had been a marshal for 11 years in 2 different territories, and then I had stopped being one, and the stopping had not been my idea, and I had been in motion ever since. I rode into Coldwater Bend on a Tuesday in September of 1878 with a horse that needed water and a stomach that needed something hot, and I had every intention of being back on the Drum Creek Road by mid-afternoon and in the next county before dark. What stopped me was a woman standing alone in the middle of the main street with a broker's writ in one hand and nothing in the other, telling 4 men with rifles that she was not moving. I pulled up my horse. I looked at the 4 men. I looked at the woman. I looked at the men again. I thought, this is not my business. I got off my horse. Her name was Vera Cass, and I learned it later. In the moment, she was simply the school teacher. I could tell that from the chalk dust on her dark skirt and the way she held herself, which was the way of someone accustomed to speaking to a room and expecting to be heard. She was not large and she was not young. Exactly, somewhere in her early 30s, with dark hair going a little loose in the wind and a face that had strong bones and a clear, steady quality that I have since come to think of as the particular look of a person who has decided they are not going to be frightened out of what they know is right. The 4 men were not Coldwater Bend men. I could tell that too. They were Harrow men, which I didn't know yet, hired hands for a land broker operation, wearing the particular look of men who have done this before and expect it to go the same way it always goes, which is that the person being pressured eventually yields because they're alone and the math is obvious. Vera Cass did not appear to be doing the math. "The writ is fraudulent," she said, in a voice that carried perfectly across the empty street. "The school land was deeded to the Coldwater Bend Education Trust in 1874 and cannot be transferred without the trustees' agreement, which you do not have." The lead man, a stocky individual with a reddish beard and the eyes of someone paid not to listen, held out his hand. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to step aside." "No," she said. The stocky man looked at his crew. His crew looked at him. Nobody looked at the dozen or so townspeople who were watching from doorways and windows and the edge of the boardwalk, because watching from doorways and windows and the edge of the boardwalk was what the townspeople of Coldwater Bend had learned to do when Harrow's men came through. I had been watching all of this from 30 feet back, still holding my horse's reins, and I had made a series of rapid assessments that a former marshal makes automatically. 4 men, armed, organized. 1 woman, alone, no backup coming. A town that had already decided not to be involved. The assessments were clear. The right answer was also clear. I had been trying for 2 years to stop knowing what the right answer was in situations like this. I tied my horse to the nearest post. "Morning," I said, walking up. Everybody turned and looked at me. "Friend," the stocky man said carefully, "this is a private property matter." "I can see that," I said. I looked at the writ in Vera's hand, or rather at a corner of it. "Mind if I see that?" Vera looked at me for the first time. It was a measuring look, the same look I would come to know well, the look she used to decide whether something was worth her trust. It lasted about 2 seconds. Then she handed me the document. I read it. She was right. It was fraudulent, badly done too, with a seal that didn't match the county records any competent man would know, and a trustee's signature that was either a forgery or a man who'd signed something he hadn't read. Either way, it was paper theater, which is what you use when you have enough hired muscle that you don't usually need the paper to hold up. "This writ doesn't carry," I said. The stocky man's jaw tightened. "Mr." The trust deed she's describing predates your instrument by 4 years, I said, and a trust deed can't be extinguished by a private sale order without a court judgment. You don't have a court judgment. You have a piece of paper with a bad seal and a signature that I'd like to see the original of. I folded the writ and held it out to Vera, who took it. So you're going to want to clear out of this street. The stocky man looked at me for a long moment. He was doing the same math Vera hadn't bothered with. There was one of me. There were 4 of them. The math was obvious. I don't know who you are, he said. That's fine, I said. Doesn't change the legal situation. He held my gaze for another 3 seconds. Then he looked at his men and something passed between them, a recalculation, and he said, "We'll be back." "Bring a valid writ," I said. They left. The street stayed empty for a moment. Then Vera Cass turned and looked at me with the same complete, measuring attention she'd given me before and said, "You know land law." "Some," I said. "You're not a lawyer." "No." "What are you?" I thought about how to answer that. "Passing through," I said. She looked at me for a moment longer. Then she said, "Come inside, I'll make coffee." I should have gotten back on my horse. I went inside. The schoolhouse was the best-kept building in Coldwater Bend, which told me something about Vera Cass before she said another word. It was solid, clean, with good windows and a stove that worked, and a row of slates on the back wall, and a shelf of books that was more extensive than you'd expect in a High Plains, Colorado town of 300 people. There were drawings pinned near the door, children's drawings, the kind that have a sun in the corner with rays coming off it like spokes, and people with circular heads and too many fingers. She made coffee on the schoolhouse stove and set a cup in front of me and one across from it, and sat down with the straight-backed ease of a woman at her own table, which is what it was. "How long has Harrow been working this town?" I said. She looked at me. "You know who Harrow is?" "I know the type," I said. "Land broker. Moves into a territory where the deeds are weak or the town too small to fight, buys up legitimate claims at pressure prices, forges the rest. Does it fast enough that by the time anyone complains to the county seat, he's already got title on half the valley." "That's accurate," she said. "How many families have sold out?" 11, she said. "In 18 months. The Penner farm, the Hadley place, the 2 Crail brothers' operation on the ridge." She stopped. "Good people. They didn't want to leave. He made staying impossible." "How?" "The Penner's well was poisoned," she said. "The Hadley's barn burned. The Crails had 3 horses stolen, and their oldest boy beaten badly enough that Mrs. Crail said she'd rather have nothing in Kansas than anything in Colorado. She said it evenly, without heat, which was worse than heat. "And the town?" She looked at her coffee. "The town is frightened," she said. "I don't blame them. Harrow has Judge Pelfer in his pocket or near enough, and the county marshal comes through twice a year if we're fortunate. Harrow's men are always here." "Who else has held out?" "Walt Greer at the feed store, Mace Tilby at the smithy, old Cora Flennick who owns the boarding house and says she'll burn it before she sells." Vera paused. "And me." "Why you?" She looked up. "Because the school is the reason this town has a future," she said, as though it were the most obvious thing in the world, and perhaps it was. "If the school goes, the families with children leave. If the families with children leave, Coldwater Bend becomes a holding operation for a land broker, and in 5 years it's a ghost camp." She looked at her coffee again. "I didn't build this school to hand it to Silas Harrow." I sat with that for a moment. I thought about writing on. I thought about the Drum Creek Road and the next county, and the long, comfortable discipline of not being involved. "What's Harrow's main operation?" I said. "He has an office at the hotel," she said. 3 men there permanently. Raddick, the man you spoke to, and his crew come through twice a week from the camp on the ridge." She looked at me. "Who are you exactly?" "Tate Drum," I said. "That's a name. It doesn't answer the question." I drank my coffee. "Former marshal, I said. 2nd Colorado Territory District until 2 years ago. What happened 2 years ago? I made a call that was right, I said, in a situation where being right cost the wrong people money. They had more money than I had rightness in the end. She looked at me for a long time. And now you pass through places, she said. Yes. Are you going to pass through this one? I looked at the drawings near the door. The suns with the spokes and the people with the round heads and the too many fingers. I haven't decided, I said. She nodded, the way she nodded when she was filing something away and not wasting words on it. The coffee's yours as long as you want it, she said. Then she stood, picked up a piece of chalk, and went to the board to prepare the afternoon lesson. I sat in the Coldwater Bend schoolhouse and drank my coffee and watched a schoolteacher write fractions on a chalkboard, and thought about what it would cost me to stay and what it had already cost me to keep moving. I stayed. I took a room at Cora Flenick's boarding house, a small, clean room on the 2nd floor with a window that looked out over the main street, and a landlady who fed me the best biscuits I'd eaten in 2 years and asked no questions she didn't need the answers to. I paid a week in advance. Cora pocketed the money, gave me a key, and said, "Radek will hear you're here by sundown." "I know," I said. "You're not worried." "I've been worried about worse," I said. She studied me with the eyes of a woman who has kept a boarding house through hard times and learned to read the men who come through it. Then she said, "Good," and went back to her kitchen. Radek's response was quicker than sundown. 2 of his men were outside Cora's by late afternoon, not doing anything, just being visible, which is the first stage of pressure. They wanted me to see them. I saw them. I went out the back and visited Walt Greer at the feed store. Walt was a lean, leathery man in his 50s who had run his store for 20 years and showed no signs of yielding to anyone or anything, which I respected. He told me what I needed to know about harrow setup in the time it takes to check a load of oats. Silas Harrow himself was seldom in Coldwater Bend. He ran 3 or 4 operations at once across the territory and moved between them, leaving his local men in charge. The local men were Radek and a man named Paul Vane who sat in the hotel office and handled the paperwork. Judge Pelfer was not Harrow's man exactly, more a man who had decided that cooperation was easier than resistance, which amounts to the same thing. "The county marshal," I said. Walt made a sound, "Corvin. He's honest enough, but he's got a district the size of 4 counties and 1 deputy. He comes through, looks at the situation, says it's a civil matter, and goes." "Have you written to the territorial office?" "Twice," Walt said. "The first letter may not have arrived. I'm not confident the second one was sent the way I handed it in." "The post office," I said. "Harrow's man handles the post," Walt said. That was well organized for a land operation this size, which told me Harrow had done this before and knew which threads to pull. I thanked Walt and went back to Cora's by a different route, thinking. That evening, Vera came to Cora's for supper, which was apparently a regular arrangement between the 2 women. I was already at the table when she arrived, and she sat across from me and said, "You stayed." I said I hadn't decided. I said, "I decided." Cora set a plate in front of each of us with the efficiency of a woman who finds conversation during cooking wasteful, and we ate for a while without speaking, which was comfortable in the way that surprises you when you're not expecting comfort. Radek's men were watching the front of the building, Vera said. "I know. Does that worry you?" "No," I said. "It tells me something which is useful. They're watching instead of acting, which means Harrow hasn't decided yet how to handle an unknown element." I reached for the salt. "That's a window." She looked at me. "A window for what?" "For making things more complicated for them, before they figure out the simplest response." "Which is?" "Run me out or bury me," I said. "Sorry, that was plain." "I appreciate plain," she said, without missing a beat. Cora sat down with her own plate and said, without preamble, "What's your plan, Marshal?" "Former Marshal," I said. "What's your plan, former Marshal?" I had been working one out since the feed store. "Harrow's operation runs on two things," I said. "The bad paper and the muscle. The paper I can attack. There are enough irregularities in what I saw this morning that a territorial court would be interested if it got there properly. The muscle is trickier because it's physical." "You're one man," Cora said. "I'm aware." "Radek has 5 at full count," Vera said. "Possibly 6, plus Vane in the office, who I believe handles the money." "Vane is the key," I said. "The operation doesn't work without the paperwork, and the paperwork doesn't work without someone who knows how to file and obscure it. If Vane becomes a liability—" "How do you make him a liability?" Vera said. "By making it clear to him," I said carefully, "that the current arrangement carries more personal risk than he bargained for. Men who do this kind of work are usually loyal to their own interests above the employer's. Radek's crew is hired muscle and they'll hold. Vane is something else. A clerk who decided one day that dishonest money was easier than honest money, and has probably been telling himself ever since that no one will ever look too close." Vera and Cora looked at each other with the look of women who have been talking about a situation for some time, and are now watching someone else catch up to where they already were. "What do you need from us?" Vera said. "Everything you have on the specific transactions," I said. "Every family that sold, what they said the terms were, whether they kept any paperwork, what pressure was applied before the sale, and the trust deed for the school. The original, not a copy." "I have it," Vera said, "in the school safe." "Good, don't move it anywhere. Don't tell anyone it's there," I thought. "Is there anyone in this town who's a decent hand with a pen? I need letters written to the Territorial Surveyor's office and to the Circuit Court in Denver, and I'd rather the handwriting not be mine or yours." "Mace Tilby's wife was a schoolteacher herself before she came here," Cora said. "Her penmanship is better than anything the county office has seen." "I'll talk to Tilby tomorrow," I said. We sat with that for a moment. Outside the window, the September dark had come in full, and the street was quiet. I could see the glow of a cigarette near the far end of the building, where one of Radek's men was still keeping watch. "You've done this before," Vera said, "not a question." "Something like it," I said. "It doesn't always go the way you plan." "I know," she said. "Most things don't. If this gets difficult before it gets better—" "Mr. Drum," she said, with a patience that had iron in it, "Harrow's men have been making it difficult for 18 months. The question isn't difficulty. The question is whether it ends." I looked at her across Cora's table in the lamplight. She looked back at me with those clear, steady eyes, and I thought, here is someone who has already made her decision and is simply waiting to see what the world does about it. "It'll end," I said. The next week was the kind of work I was good at, and had been pretending for 2 years I didn't miss. I talked to Mace Tilby, who was a square-built man with a forge-scarred forearm and a temper he kept under deliberate control, and whose wife Bess turned out to be exactly as Cora described. A precise, composed woman who listened to what I needed, asked 2 questions that were exactly the right 2 questions, and began writing letters that afternoon with a penmanship that would have satisfied any court in the territory. The letters went to 3 places: the Territorial Surveyor's office in Denver, the Circuit Court, and a former colleague of mine named Abbott, who was still a marshal in the Eastern District, and who I trusted to route a communication to the right ears without it going through Coldwater Ben's compromised post. I gave the letters to a rancher named Grover who was making a supply run to the next town, explaining only that they were important and needed to reach their destinations promptly. Grover was not a Coldwater Bend man. He ran his operation 6 miles out and came to town for supplies, and had not yet felt Harrow's direct pressure, though he knew it was coming. He took the letters without complaint and promised they'd move. While the letters moved, I moved differently. I had a conversation with Paul Vane. Vane was precisely what I'd guessed from Walt's description. A thin, careful man of about 45, who had the look of someone who had once worked in a real office in a real city, and had slid sideways into the current arrangement through a series of small decisions that each seemed reasonable at the time. He had an office at the back of the hotel with a filing system that was, from what I could see through the open door, quite organized, which was useful to Harrow and would be useful to a court. I walked into his office at 9 in the morning and sat down across from him. He looked up from his papers and went very still. "I'm not going to do anything alarming," I said. "I just want to talk." "I don't think we have anything to talk about," he said carefully. "You're the one who files the writs," I said, "the transfer documents, the sale agreements." "I'm an administrative assistant to Mr. Harrow's land acquisition operation," Vane said. "That's one way to describe it." I folded my hands on his desk. "Mr. Vane, I was a territorial marshal for 11 years. I know how land fraud investigations work at the territorial level because I've helped run 3 of them. The man who goes to prison is not usually the man at the top. The man at the top has lawyers and distance. The man who goes to prison is usually the man who signed the paperwork, because the paperwork is what a jury can see and touch and read." Vane's face had gone a careful, controlled pale. "The Harrow operation has enough irregular documents in this valley to interest a territorial court considerably," I said. "Forged trust seals, fraudulent transfer orders, possibly subordination of a county judge. That's a serious picture. The man whose name is on the most documents is in the most serious position." Vane said nothing. "I'm not offering you anything," I said. "I want to be clear about that. I'm not a marshal anymore, and I'm not here to make deals. I'm simply here to tell you what the picture looks like from the outside, because I think you are a man who makes decisions based on information, and you may not have had full information when you made the ones that led you here." I stood up. "Good morning." I walked out. I did not know whether it would work. Sometimes it does, with men like Vane, men who got in over their heads and have been managing the anxiety of it for long enough that someone naming it plainly breaks something loose. Sometimes it doesn't. I had planted a seed, and I could not know which kind of ground I'd planted it in. What I could know was that Radek would hear about the visit within the hour. He came to find me at noon. I was at the schoolhouse when he arrived, not by accident. I had been helping Vera with a stuck window frame in the back room, a mundane task that she had mentioned needed doing, and that I had the tools for, which is the kind of thing that happens when you stop passing through a place and start being in it. She had been teaching morning lessons, and I had been working on the window, and we had been talking occasionally through the open door about the situation, and about Mace Tilby's wife's progress on the letters, and about an approach I was considering for the Judge Pelfer problem, which was delicate. When Radek came in the front door with 2 of his men, he found me with a plane in my hand and Vera at the blackboard finishing a multiplication problem for a student who was still working it out on a slate. Radek looked at this tableau for a moment. "Outside," he said to me. "Minute," I said. I finished the trim on the window frame and set the plane down. Then I looked at Vera, who had turned from the board with the chalk still in her hand and was watching with complete composure. I said, "Looks like it'll hold now." "Thank you," she said. I went outside. We stood in the street in the September noon sun, which was still warm, and Radek looked at me with the expression of a man who has been managing a situation, and recently found the situation more complicated than expected. "You went to see Vane," he said. "I did." "That wasn't smart." "I thought it was fairly smart," I said. He studied me. "You're not just passing through." "No," I said, "I'm not. Harrow's going to want to know who you are." "My name is Tate Drum. I was marshal in the 2nd Colorado District until 1876. I'm known to the Territorial Office and the Circuit Court in Denver, and I have correspondents going to both." I said this plainly and without emphasis, the way you state facts that are true and want received as facts rather than threats. If something happens to me here, it creates a significant amount of official attention in a valley where Mr. Harrow prefers limited official attention. Radek's eyes narrowed. He was doing the calculation again, and this time the math was genuinely complicated. "Nothing's going to happen to you," he said carefully. "Good," I said. "Then we understand each other." I went back inside. Vera was at the board, but she was watching the door. When I came in, she turned back to the lesson. "That went all right," she said to the board. "For now," I said. "It'll get harder before it gets easier." "You mentioned that before," she said. "It bears repeating." One of the students, a small girl with red plates, looked up from her slate and said, "Are those men going to come back?" "Possibly," Vera said, in the same tone she used for everything in this classroom, which was the tone of someone for whom there are answers to all questions, and the first step is to look at the question plainly. "But we're going to finish the lesson regardless." Page 4. The girl looked at her book. I sat in the back row and waited and thought about how many ways this could go, and which ones were most likely, and what I needed to have in place before Harrow himself showed up, which was going to happen. Men like Harrow came to the problem personally when the hired solution stopped working. He arrived on a Thursday. I knew at the moment I saw the horse, a better animal than anything else tied up on Coldwater Bend's Main Street, a gray with a deep chest and the look of regular good care. The man who got off it was perhaps 50, well dressed in the frontier manner of someone who spends money on quality but not on show. He had a businessman's face, composed, assessing, with the particular quality of a man who has been right enough times that he trusts his own judgment entirely. Silas Harrow walked into his hotel, and I watched him go from the window of Cora's boarding house and thought, "Here we are." He sent word through Radek that evening, "A civil meeting, breakfast tomorrow, the hotel." I went. Harrow was already at the table when I came in, with coffee poured and a composed expression that did not change when I sat down. He was the kind of man who does not show his thinking, which is a useful quality and a slightly unnerving one to be across a table from. "Mr. Drum," he said. "Mr. Harrow," I said. "I understand you've been in my town for about a week." "I've been in Coldwater Bend for a week," I said. "I wasn't aware you owned it." Something moved behind his eyes, amusement or irritation, hard to distinguish. "I understand you've been speaking to some of the local residents, and to my staff." "I'm a sociable person," I said. "You were a territorial marshal," he said. "Your record in the 2nd District was solid, until the incident with the Verity Mining Company in 1876. He said this with the air of someone who has done his research, which meant he'd had someone do it fast, a telegram probably, to someone in the right position to pull files. "The Verity matter," I said. "Yes." "You called a raid on a mining operation that turned out to have political backing you weren't aware of," Harrow said. "Your call was correct legally. You were nonetheless removed." "That's the story," I said. "It's a story I find instructive," he said. "About the limits of doing the right thing without the right support." "Is that a lesson you apply to your own operation?" I said. His expression didn't change. "Mr. Drum, I'm a land acquisition professional. I identify undervalued properties in developing territories, secure transfer through legal mechanisms, and consolidate holdings for development. It's a legitimate practice." "Some of it is," I said. "The parts where you pressure families with well poisoning and barn burning and hired violence until they sell at a fraction of fair value are less legitimate. The parts where you forge trust instruments and file fraudulent county writs are actively criminal." He looked at me for a long moment. "You have correspondents going to Denver," he said. "I do." "And to the circuit court." "Yes." "That takes time," he said. "Courts move slowly. Investigations move slowly. A great deal can change in a valley in the time it takes official interest to arrive. That's true, I said. Which is why I've also been speaking to the 11 families who sold to you, and to the county recorder's office in the next district. Not this one, since Judge Pelfer seems to have a conflict of interest about the specific instruments on file, and why I have an affidavit from a man who was present at the Penner well when it was done. I said this last part without indicating whether the affidavit existed yet, because it was in progress but not complete, and sometimes the information that something exists is more useful than the thing itself. Harrow was quiet for a moment. "What do you want?" he said. It was a business question, asked in a business tone, and I respected the directness of it. "I want you to be gone from Coldwater Bend," I said. "I want the fraudulent title transfers voided and the original deed holders compensated at fair value for anything legitimately acquired. I want Paul Vane's files intact and transferred to the circuit court's custody, and I want this valley left alone." "That's an ambitious list," he said. "It's a fair one," I said. We looked at each other across the table in the morning light, and I thought about 11 families who'd left land they'd built with their own hands and a school teacher who'd stood alone in a street when everyone else looked away. And I felt the old particular quality of knowing what the right answer was and being willing to pay the price for it. "Think about it," I said. I stood up. "I'll be around." He thought about it for 2 days, which was 2 days during which Raddick's men were notably more present, and I was notably more careful. I did not go anywhere alone after dark. I made sure Vera did not either, which required a direct conversation in which I explained the situation plainly, and she received it with the same composure she received everything, and then said that she was perfectly capable of being careful without being managed, and I said I agreed, and we reached a working arrangement. On the second evening she came to Cora's for supper again and brought the school trust deed in a leather envelope, which she handed to me without comment. I looked through it carefully. It was solid. The original 1874 deed was clear, properly witnessed, filed correctly with the county, with a trustee designation that named the school board, a board that still technically existed, even if it had not met in some time. The Harrow writ was a transparent fraud to anyone who looked at both documents together, which Judge Pelfer had presumably been careful not to do. "This will hold," I said. "I know," she said. "You've known all along." "Yes," she said. "The question was never the deed. The question was whether anyone would stand up long enough to make the deed matter." I looked at her. In the lamplight she had a quality of absolute stillness, not rigidity, but the stillness of someone who has already found the center of what they believe and stopped being moved by what is peripheral to it. I had not seen that quality in another person in longer than I wanted to count. "Why did you build the school?" I said. I hadn't meant to ask it. It came out sideways, the way things do when you're not guarding carefully enough. She looked at her coffee. "I came here from Ohio 6 years ago," she said. "My husband had a piece of land on the flats, not much, but a start. He died of fever the second winter. I had the land, the school board had an opening, and the children of Coldwater Bend had no one to teach them." She paused. "I stayed because the school needed building. Then I stayed because it was built. Then I stayed because they needed me, and I needed them, and somewhere in there, it stopped being a decision I made each morning and became simply what I was." I sat with that for a moment. "Did you ever think about leaving after your husband?" "Of course," she said, "every week for the first year. And then less often, and then," she looked up, "you stop thinking about the alternative when the place you're in has become the answer." I thought about 2 years of moving, about the Drum Creek Road and the next county, and the long, comfortable discipline of passing through. "I've been thinking about the alternative for 2 years," I said. She looked at me, and I'm sitting in Coldwater Bend," I said. She held my gaze for a moment, and the look she gave me was different from the measuring look. It was plainer than that, with something in it I did not try to name. Then Cora came in from the kitchen and set down a plate, and the moment passed into the regular business of the evening. Harrow made his decision on the third day. It was not the decision I had offered him. He sent Radek and 4 men to the schoolhouse at 7 in the morning before lessons, when he believed I would be at Cora's. He had not correctly understood my schedule, which had shifted over the previous several days. I was at the schoolhouse. I heard them coming from the window I had fixed, which now gave a clear view of the street approach, and I had about 30 seconds. I did 2 things in those 30 seconds. I put the trust deed envelope in Vera's hands and told her to go out the back to Cora's, and I moved to the front door. Vera did not go to Cora's. She went to the back of the schoolroom and stood there, which I did not have time to argue about. Radek came in with his 4 men, and he stopped when he saw me. "Harrow's made his decision," I said. "Step aside, Drum," Radek said. "No," I said. We looked at each other. Radek was not a foolish man. He knew what the situation was, knew that what happened in the next 30 seconds was going to have consequences that extended beyond Coldwater Bend, knew that I had sent letters to Denver and that I was a former marshal with a documented record, and that shooting me was a categorically different kind of problem than pressuring a schoolteacher. His hand was near his gun. So was mine. What broke it was not either of us. It was Walt Greer, who came in the front door behind Radek's men with a shotgun and the expression of a man who has been waiting for a long time to make a decision and has finally made it. Behind him was Mace Tilby. Behind Mace Tilby was Grover, the rancher from 6 miles out, and 2 of his hands. And behind them, filling the doorway of the Coldwater Bend schoolhouse on a September morning, were approximately 15 people who had been watching from doorways and windows and the edges of boardwalks for 18 months, and who had, apparently, decided this morning was different. Radek looked behind him. He looked at me. He looked at Vera Cass, who was standing at the back of her schoolroom with a trust deed in a leather envelope and a look of complete, implacable steadiness. "This is done," I said. "Whatever Harrow is paying you, it isn't worth this." Radek stood there for a long moment. Then he lowered his hand from his gun, and the men around him did the same, and they walked out. The rest of it was work, not drama. Paul Vane had, as I had hoped, made his decision in the days since our conversation. He came to me the afternoon after the schoolhouse standoff with 3 leather files of documents, which he handed over with the expression of a man who has been carrying something heavy for too long and has finally put it down. He told me what he knew about Harrow's operation, which was considerable, and I wrote it down carefully and had Bess Tilby transcribe it in her impeccable hand for the territorial records. The circuit court's representative arrived from Denver 17 days after Bess's letters went out, which was faster than I had expected, and suggested that the territorial office had been watching the Coldwater Bend situation already. The representative was a methodical man named Creel who spent a week reviewing Vane's files and the affidavits I had collected from 7 of the 11 families who had sold, and at the end of the week said, with the particular satisfaction of a man whose work has been made easier by good preparation, that the case was solid. Harrow was arrested in his hotel room on a Wednesday morning. He did not resist. Men like Harrow understand when the arithmetic has changed completely. Radek and 2 of his men were taken the same day. Vane's cooperation was noted in the record, which was the most I could do for him, and would matter or not depending on what a judge decided later. Judge Pelfer, informed of the situation by Creel's representative, recused himself from every pending Harrow matter and aged about 10 years in a week. He was not charged. The evidence of his cooperation was thin enough that a court would have difficulty with it, but he knew what everyone knew, and the knowing was its own consequence. The 11 families who had sold were not entirely made whole. Some of the land had already been resold to third parties with no knowledge of the fraud, which created complications that would take years to work through. But the fraudulent instruments were voided, the trust deed for the schoolhouse was confirmed by the court, and the fair compensation fund that Creel's office ordered from Harrow's seized accounts gave each family something to stand on while the legal process ran its course. It was not a perfect resolution. It was a real one, which in my experience is what you get. Through all of it, I was in Coldwater Bend. This was not something I had planned. I had planned to stay long enough to see the letters arrive and the official machinery engaged, and then to get back on the Drum Creek Road and let the machinery do what machinery does. What happened instead was that I kept finding reasons to stay. The vein files needed organizing, the affidavits needed collecting, the schoolhouse window needed a second look. There was a fence at Mace Tilby's smithy that wanted a third post. I am not a man who lies to himself extensively, so I will say plainly that the fence and the window were not the reasons. The reason was that Coldwater Bend had stopped feeling like a place I was passing through and started feeling like a place I was in. And the principal reason for that distinction was a schoolteacher who drank coffee at Cora's table in the evenings and talked about fractions and trust deeds and the 11 families and the nature of the Drum Creek flats in autumn with equal seriousness, and who looked at me with those clear eyes and did not perform anything for my benefit and did not require anything of me that I wasn't already willing to give. We talked a great deal in those weeks about Ohio, where she was from, and New Mexico, where I'd grown up. About the school and what she wanted it to be, a proper 4-room building eventually, with enough teachers that she could specialize in the older children and someone else could take the younger ones. About the Verity matter, which I told her more fully than I had told anyone, and which she received the way she received everything, completely and without rushing to a judgment. About her husband, who had been a good man and a poor farmer, and whom she had loved in the plain, uncomplicated way of two people who are well matched. About my years as a marshal, which had been good years, real, purposeful, the best kind of work for the kind of man I was. "Do you miss it?" she asked one evening. "The badge, no," I said. "The work, yes. The being somewhere for a reason. Having a place that needed what you could do." I looked at my hands. "I had that for 11 years and I've been without it for 2, and I know the difference." "You have it here," she said. "For now," I said. She looked at me. "For now," she agreed, and then, after a moment, "It doesn't have to be for now." The lamp was low, and the September dark had turned to October cool, and Cora had gone to bed an hour earlier, and we were sitting in the kitchen with the stove going, and the particular quality of a late evening between two people who have been circling something for weeks and have arrived, finally, at the edge of it. "Vera," I said. "I'm not asking you to decide tonight," she said. "I'm not asking you anything. I'm telling you what I see, which is what I usually do." She looked at her cup. "I see a man who stopped because he couldn't not stop, who stayed because leaving was wrong, who has been doing the work of someone who belongs to a place and trying to frame it as something temporary." She looked up. "You can frame it however you want. I'm just telling you what it looks like from where I'm sitting." I sat with that for a long time. "If I stay," I said, "it's not temporary." "No," she said, "it's not. I don't have a badge I don't have." "Coldwater Bend needs a marshal," she said. "The town council has been discussing it since the Harrow matter broke. They need someone who knows the work and has a history the county office will respect." She paused. "I may have mentioned your name." I looked at her. "I may have been somewhat direct about it," she said, with a quality that was very close to amusement. "You organized this," I said. "I presented information," she said. "That's different." I thought about the Drum Creek Road, about the next county and the county after that, and the long, flat discipline of motion without direction. I thought about 11 years of work that had mattered, and 2 years of nothing mattering, and 1 week in September when a woman had stood alone in a street, and I had gotten off my horse. "All right," I said. "All right," she said. She did not reach across the table, and neither did I, and it was enough. I took the badge in November. It was a county appointment, confirmed by the territorial office in December, which moved faster on my case than I expected. Creel had put in a word, apparently, and the work on the Harrow matter had reached Denver with a clarity that opened doors. We married in the spring. A simple thing in the schoolhouse, with Cora and Walt and Mace and Bess and a good part of Coldwater Bend present, and a preacher named Sorrel who said what needed saying and stopped when it was said. The school got its second room the following year. The 4-room building Vera planned for came in stages, the third room by 1881, the fourth by 1883, and by then she had 2 other teachers working with her and had shifted herself to the older children, which was what she had always wanted. I have been the marshal of Coldwater Bend and the surrounding county for the years since, which is not the same work I did as a territorial marshal, but is real work and purposeful and mine, and I know the difference between that and drifting, because I knew it for 2 years before I knew it for longer. Raddick got 3 years in the territorial prison and came out a quieter man. Harrow got 7 and did not come out quieter, but he did not come back to this valley, which was the important thing. Vane was given 18 months suspended in consideration of his cooperation and moved to Kansas, where he apparently works in a dry goods store and keeps clean accounts. Judge Pelfer retired the following year. His replacement is a woman's son from the Crales Ranch, who studied law at night for 4 years and passed the territorial bar on his second attempt. He is scrupulously honest and has a particular dislike of fraudulent instruments. The 11 families, most of them. Some had gone too far and built new lives elsewhere and did not return. Others came back when the compensation fund gave them something to stand on, and 3 of them are farming the Drum Creek Flats still, which is good land if you know how to work it. Vera knows their children's names and their current grades and their particular strengths and difficulties, which is the kind of knowledge that belongs to a person who has decided a place is hers and means to deserve it. I stopped passing through a place on a Tuesday in September because a woman was standing alone in a street and I could not look away. That is the whole of the explanation, and also not the whole of it, but it is as much as I know how to put plainly. The rest of it, the October evenings and the school with its 4 rooms, and the badge I have worn now long enough that the shape of it is familiar in my hand, and the work of it is the work I was made for. The rest of it is simply what a life looks like when you finally stop moving long enough to find out where you are.